Alright guys, welcome back to the channel. It's Matty here, and today what we're going to be doing is taking a look at what we can do to upgrade all of the previously existing archetypes that I'm sure a lot of people are still interested in playing. In yesterday's video, we made a bunch of decks that I thought were the best decks we could possibly make for all of those new cards that were released in Shining Revelry. So this video is sort of the opposite. We're updating and upgrading all of the old pre-existing archetypes that I think are still really relevant in the format right now, but can definitely be improved by some of those new cards that did release in Shining Revelry. So let's get right into it, guys. But before we do that, I'm just going to plug the Discord server. So if you're watching this video and you have a Discord, I would highly suggest that you guys go check out the Discord server. We've got about 300 people in there right now. It's a great place to come hang out, get some advice, post your deck lists, and even find people for trades. It's a really great place, and we're trying to grow that community in the Discord, so I highly recommend it. Link to join will be down in the description below. So let's get right into it. The number one, or I guess the first deck that we're going to take a look at in this video is going to be Charizard EX. So Charizard has always been a very interesting Pokemon in the game. Sometimes it's at the top of the metagame, sometimes it's completely irrelevant, and I think right now in this format, I think Charizard definitely has a place. A lot of the top decks that are seeing play right now, at least early on in this format, are very passive. They're very much sort of sitting back on the bench, getting set up, and then doing a lot of damage late in the game. This is the sort of format where Charizard really does sort of shine, and I think that we have at least one card that I think really does improve Charizard's overall flow, and that is going to be Iono. So this list here, and basically every other deck that we're going to be showcasing here in this video, is a list that has been performing well, or did perform well, in an online tournament already in this early format. So I didn't necessarily build all of these decks, but I did find them and maybe change them a little bit, but for the most part, these are kind of proven to already have been doing good in a competitive setting, so keep that in mind. This list is actually playing 2 Moltres, 2 Charmander, I think this is the new Charmander and Charmeleon, but it's playing 1-in-1 of the new Charizard and the old Charizard. I don't know if this is necessarily correct. I think that this particular player in this list probably wanted to play the new Charizard because it is out and it is somewhat of a good card in various different scenarios, but I think for the most part, old Charizard is probably still best for right now. The 200 damage allows us to KO everything in the format, and that does include some of those stage 2 Pokemon like Gallade and even things like Gyarados EX, which are somewhat, above sort of that breakpoint that we see most of these decks able to do. But the main upside to Charizard now, and I think a big reason why the deck has gotten even better, is actually because of Iono. And Iono is a card that I think a lot of people were really high on, especially when they first saw it. I think Iono is a totally fine card. I think it's very good in certain decks, and in a deck like this, where you're playing a lot of evolution Pokemon, and a lot of Pokemon in general, I think that it is proper to run it in a deck like this. I don't think we need really any other Pokemon with Charizard like we were playing Arcanine back in the day. Some people are actually playing the new Sky Support Shaman to help kind of retreat out of Moltres a little bit more effectively, but this deck is playing 2 X-Speeds and 1 Leaf, 2 Pokemon Communication, and 2 Iono. Those are going to be our consistency cards in the deck. Very bare bones, but you don't really need a lot of those extra ancillary supporter cards when you're playing Charizard, because all you need is to get the Charizard set up and it's going to do everything it needs to do. 200 damage is enough to KO anything in the game, basically. So Giant Cape as well. I think 1 copy of Giant Cape is probably correct. It allows us to bring Moltres up to 160 HP and hopefully live an additional turn to make sure that we're buying ourselves enough time to get into that Charizard EX. So, like I said, this list is playing both versions of Charizard EX, but I think that the older one is still better, the one from Genetic Apex. So, try it, test it yourself. I myself am a bigger fan of Genetic Apex Charizard EX, at least for right now. I think it pairs better with Moltres, so if we are playing Moltres, it makes more sense to play the old Charizard. But if we get, honestly, and I've said this I think a couple of times, if we get a new sort of aggressive, fast-paced, fire-type Pokemon that can maybe take some KOs for a low amount of energy, maybe comparable to something like a Pachirisu or a Weavile EX, if we get a fire-type version of those cards, I do think that the new Charizard EX will actually be very good. But for now, I don't know if it has everything it needs to be super viable. But anyway, here is updated and upgraded Charizard. Next up is going to be Pachirisu. So Pachirisu, is a card that has seen some play, especially when it first came out. 18 Trainer Pachirisu was pretty relevant. I still think that Pachirisu is a good card, and I think that when we pair it with the single prize Pachirisu from Shining Revelry, as well as the new Pikachu EX, we have a deck that is a little bit more flexible in its capabilities basically in the late game. That's what Pikachu EX allows us to do. With red, it allows us to basically take KOs, and even Pachirisu EX, right? Doing 80 damage and 80 damage sometimes isn't enough to take KOs, especially if Pokemon or decks are, being healed by things like Erica and Irida. So red definitely allows us to potentially take more KOs. Rocky Helmet and Giant Cape, of course, both needed. Pachirisu needs tool cards to do the full damage, but we also have the small Pachirisu to maybe take one turn to, get that energy on Pikachu EX, and then the next turn, maybe we can go ahead and start attacking with Pachirisu, and then going into Pikachu in the late game. So, the deck doesn't have a perfect flow to it. I don't think that Pikachu EX right now has like the perfect partner. I do think Pachirisu is actually probably a pretty good partner to pair with it. We're not playing Dawn in this list because, again, we're very reliant on Pachirisu living 2 or 3 turns. But, like I said, most decks really aren't kind of fully set up until turn 3 or turn 4. So we actually have more time than you would think. And I think that really does open up, avenues for Pikachu EX. Again, the one downside to Pikachu is that it has only 120 HP, which means that, we really wanted to end the game with that Thunderbolt attack. If our opponent has the opportunity to KO Pikachu after we attack, they're probably going to do so because we don't have a lot of HP. So hopefully Pachirisu takes that first KO, and then Pikachu can kind of clean up later in the game. That's really what this deck is all about. And I think that Team Rocket Grunt also helps us extend those games to buy some time. Maybe even 2 copies of Team Rocket Grunt might be correct in a list like this. But overall, I think that Pikachu EX is pretty good. And again, Pachirisu is a card that I think is still also pretty relevant. We'll have to see exactly how the electric type does in this format. It's kind of fallen off over the last few meta games, but now I think we're getting some more really interesting pieces to the electric type decks. Things like the new Pachirisu and Pikachu EX are definitely really good, and I think that they honestly pair really well with this Pachirisu EX deck. So here it is. That's what in my mind, how I would be playing Pachirisu right now. This is how I would upgrade your Pachirisu deck. Next up is actually going to be Giratina, or not Giratina. Why did I say Giratina? It's actually Darkrai and Greninja. So yes, I think we're all familiar with Greninja and Darkrai. This is an archetype here that, saw quite a bit of play, especially upon the release of Darkrai. It was one of sort of the top 3 ways that we've always played Darkrai. Now we have Giratina, of course, so I think there's 4 key ways that we can play Darkrai. Darkrai is still one of the best cards in the game, but again, in a format right now where things seem to be a little bit more passive, decks are kind of, building themselves up and sort of just not really doing anything for the first few turns. What this deck does is it allows us to actually go into Greninja a little bit more consistently. It's a stage 2 Pokemon, so it does take up some space in your deck, but that extra damage when paired with Cyrus as well to help bring a Pokemon up into the active spot, it really does sort of help us take KOs because Darkrai does a decent amount of damage, but it doesn't do that much damage. So hopefully that early game damage from Kangaskhan paired with the Water Shuriken flexibility, being able to, do the 20 damage to basically any Pokemon you want, it actually ends up being pretty viable. I think that right now is as good of a time to play Darkrai with Greninja as it ever has been. So if you really were a fan of Greninja decks, or maybe you just don't have all of the new cards, maybe you don't have Giratina, or you don't want to play Magnezone, I think that Greninja is actually a really, really good partner for Darkrai. Again, we have one Iono in here. This is just a good card, like I said, for all of these decks that are playing evolution Pokemon, which we are. We're playing 10 Pokemon in the deck, so I think that Pokemon Communications in Iono does make this deck even more consistent. But like I said, one Team Rocket Grunt to potentially extend games, give you another turn, buy you some time to go and evolve that Greninja to get fully set up. And again, the longer that the early game gets extended, the more damage we're able to do with attaching to Darkrai, attacking with Kangaskhan, and then, of course, taking that time to evolve up Greninja. So, like I said, I think that the format right now, is in a way that is actually making this deck pretty well positioned. And, it's a previously existing archetype, but I think that it's as good of a time to play it right now as really any other time. So, yeah, there it is. Next up is going to be Exeggutor. So I think I've covered this list before. If not, I've covered some Meowscarada decks before on the channel, but I think Exeggutor is still really relevant. Like I said, a lot of decks take some time to get set up. So when you're playing something that's aggressive, fast-paced, that also has a lot of HP, like Exeggutor, you're really, kind of putting yourself in a pretty good position, and I think it does pair really well with Meowscarada as sort of that backup attacking option. We've seen people play Arceus with Exeggutor before. I think that's still a decent archetype. The cool thing about Meowscarada, although it does take up more space in your deck than Arceus, basically it's immune to red. And I think that more and more decks are playing red. 140 HP when paired with Giant Cape brings you to 160. And if you're not an EX Pokemon, that's actually a very relevant number. It's basically like being an EX Pokemon with 180 HP. So Meowscarada is safe against basically a lot of breakpoints being 160 HP. And I think that's a really, really big deal. And I think it pairs extremely well with Exeggutor as well, in the sense that it only needs 2 energies to attack. So that is definitely a benefit for Meowscarada. But yeah, I think Exeggutor and fast-paced grass-type decks are really good. We're no strangers to pairing Exeggutor with other late-game attackers. We did it with Celebi, we've done it with Arceus, and now I think doing it with Meowscarada is honestly what... It works extremely well. I don't really know what else to say. I really love this archetype. In fact, Meowscarada, I think, as time goes on, is actually going to prove to be probably a better option than Arceus, which is kind of crazy because I said this, the opposite as time goes on, but enough people are playing red that I think Meowscarada actually, at least in grass-type decks, has a little bit more going for it, at least currently in the format, than Arceus does. And of course, with red, to fix some KOs here, Cyrus, Sabrina, 2 Erika's, Giant Cape, all of the good stuff that we would normally run in this deck. We don't have that much room to play something like Pokemon Communications or Iono, so we are a little bit more reliant on just drawing into those Pokemon and hopefully getting Exeggutor early enough. But if we do, I think we would much rather be playing things like Giant Cape and Erika's, red of course being very important as well. So yeah, I think that this is a really great way to be playing this deck, and I think Exeggutor is still really, really good. So if you wanted to play Exeggutor, I think that this is a really great way to play it. And yeah, fast-paced aggressive decks I think are rewarded pretty heavily in the format right now. So yeah, there it is. Okay, so next up is going to be Dialga and Arceus. So I'm actually not super high on Dialga or Arceus right now in the format. I've said it multiple times. I think that red changed the breakpoints of the format, and basically having 140 HP on Arceus now isn't nearly as good as it really should be, because with red we're able to do that damage with most attacking Pokemon in the game for sure. And then the problem with Dialga is that, again, it's also sort of just gets KO'd in a lot of different scenarios. It also is a little bit slow, so I think basically when you compare this particular deck against, per se, Darkrai and Giratina, or even Giratina and Mewtwo, really all of the Giratina decks, what they're able to do is set up 2 Pokemon at the same time, which is kind of what this deck does, but I think that the Pokemon that we're setting up, both Dialga and Arceus, when you set them up at the same time, they just really don't equal as much of damage potential as something like Darkrai and Giratina do, or Mewtwo and Giratina do. So I just don't think that there's enough upside, and again, the breakpoints have all changed because of red, and those damage thresholds have changed. A lot of Pokemon are basically able to KO you now, even with Giant Cape. So I don't think that Dialga and Arceus is as well positioned as it was in previous formats, but I know some people are still interested in playing it, and if we are going to be playing it, I think that this is probably the correct way to go right now. I like 1 copy of red, 1 copy of Giovanni as well with Rocky Helmets. This should help us take KOs on basically everything in the format. It's enough damage modifications. I think that Giovanni right now has the potential to still be really good. I think the main reason we play it is for, the Rampardos matchup, but also Meowscarada. Again, 2 really relevant high HP single prize Pokemon that are immune to red. So I think that in decks that struggle against those particular matchups, 1 copy of Giovanni might actually be correct. So I actually do like Giovanni as well. Mew EX should help us in the Mewtwo matchup, but also in the Palkia matchup. So yeah, I think that, Arceus and Dialga is fine right now. I think it's probably fallen out of that top 5, in my opinion. I know some people were playing Giratina with Dialga and Arceus. That's, of course, another way that we can update this list. But I think that's sort of a different archetype, right? If we're playing Giratina in this deck, I think overall it's just a different deck. So this is the upgraded version of the true, classic Dialga and Arceus archetype, which I do think is still a good deck, but I don't think it's as good as it was, sorry, I hit the mic, in previous formats, particularly in last formats. So yeah, there it is. Not much else really to say about it. I think I kind of covered everything I wanted to say. So next up, let's get into the fighting deck / Hitmonlee deck. So yeah, Rampardos is still really good. I thought Rampardos would fall off. I honestly, I did. But then I realized that Gyarados has become extremely popular, and Rampardos is still good against Arceus decks, and it's good in just various different, archetypes as well. Like 130 damage is 130 for 1 energy. I think Rampardos is just, in general, a really good card, and I think one of the main upsides to Rampardos is that because it is a fossil Pokemon, we're basically guaranteed to start with the other basic Pokemon in our deck, because fossil Pokemon don't count as basic Pokemon until they're in play. So in a deck like this, we are guaranteed to lead off with either Hitmonlee or Farfetch'd or our one copy of Marshadow. Of course, we would rather lead off with Farfetch'd and Hitmonlee. But I think Hitmonlee, again, is really well positioned because what it does is it allows us to hit around those Druddigons that we're seeing in Darkrai and Giratina decks, but also it really, really significantly helps your matchups against Gyarados, and Gyarados is definitely a top player in the format right now. Hitmonlee is basically, it's not an auto-win card, but in a lot of ways it kind of is. Hitmonlee decks honestly have about a 70 to 80% win rate against Gyarados, so as we'll talk about Gyarados in a little bit, I think that Hitmonlee is very correct in the format right now. Whether you're playing Gallade or Rampardos, I think that you definitely benefit more from playing Hitmonlee than say something like a Hitmonchan or even a Sudowoodo. I think that Hitmonlee is much, much better in the format currently. And of course, we have one copy of Red. So we can further extend that damage from Rampardos to 150 against EX Pokemon, and then we can extend that damage from Marshadow to 120 against EX Pokemon. So very, very relevant, especially when combined with that early chip damage that Hitmonlee and Farfetch'd is doing. So yes, Rampardos is still really relevant in the format right now. This can't all fit on one screen, but I wanted to zoom in so you guys could, see the cards. But one Pokemon Communications there at the bottom. I also think that's correct. Not too much room in the deck here. Of course, we're playing fossils. You got to play all the Pokemon here. I think one Cyrus, one Sabrina is still correct. And I think X-Speed is also required in this deck because if we do end up leading off with Marshadow, we would like to get out of the active spot as early as possible. So I think 2 X-Speed is kind of needed. So we're kind of just, throwing in one Pokemon Communications to, help the deck flow a little bit better. But the cool thing with this deck is that Rampardos really doesn't need to get set up that early. So keep that in mind. Also, basically, it only needs 1 energy to attack, which is really good. But yeah, really good against Gyarados, still really good against all of the Arceus decks, and pretty decent against most other decks in the format. I think that Hitmonlee is kind of needed, honestly. If we're playing Rampardos and Gallade, either of those decks, I think that they are definitely sort of a requirement to be playing Hitmonlee, at least right now in this early format. So yeah, there it is. And then that's going to lead us into the other Hitmonlee deck, which I do think is actually still really relevant. Hitmonlee Magnezone is interesting. So basically what we can do with this list, as opposed to Rampardos, is lean a little bit more into Marshadow. We're only playing one copy of Marshadow because, again, it's not a Pokemon we want to lead with. We are still playing 2x speed. So this is a very similar list to Rampardos. Of course, Magnezone doesn't do as much damage as Rampardos, but it does hit some Pokemon for weakness. So it's sort of just a different flavor. If you didn't want to play Rampardos, if you were still a believer in Magnezone, this is a version that I think works really well. And this is a pretty old archetype, to be fair. People were playing Fighting Magnezone for a while in the format where Magnezone was released. It was a pretty relevant archetype, and I think now it's actually as good as it ever has been. So again, if you wanted to kind of throw back and go back and play an archetype like this, I think that it is actually much better now in the format, and I think that it definitely has potential. Again, we see one Iono here instead of Pokemon Communications, but we still have Cyrus here. This is 2 copies of Cyrus and not one Sabrina, one Cyrus. Doesn't necessarily matter. Again, Cyrus does pair really well with Hitmonlee, but Sabrina is certainly really good in a lot of scenarios as well. This deck is running one Sudowoodo instead of Farfetch'd, so I mean, I think they're similar. Of course, Sudowoodo has more HP than Farfetch'd, but it's not guaranteed, right? There's not as many, I guess, EX Pokemon that are going to be leading off in the format now, so Sudowoodo is maybe less valuable than it was last format, but it's still a pretty good card. So whether you're swapping out Farfetch'd for Sudowoodo or Magnezone for Rampardos, I think the decks function very similarly. And I'm not going to spend a ton of time talking about these 2 decks because I think we all know what's going on. But yeah, Hitmonlee, very, very good in the format right now. So I would definitely recommend playing Hitmonlee if you're going to be playing any of these fighting type archetypes. Okay, so let's get into the water decks, and then we're going to get into the Mewtwo deck. So here is Palkia. Now this is a version of Palkia that actually did really well recently in online tournament play. So I think Palkia is still really good. I don't know necessarily like how we should be playing Palkia, because there's a lot of different ways. So this is the old classic version of Palkia with Manaphy with the washout Vaporeon. You could also play 18 Trainer Palkia. You could play Origin Form, Palkia with Palkia EX. So there's a lot of different ways that we can play Palkia, but for the most part, this deck isn't actually playing really any of the new cards. You're just sort of, doing the tried and true, Misty early game, one Articuno to possibly, Misty into Articuno turn 1. We have Irida, we have got Cyrus, we have Giant Capes. It's just a strong deck, and I think that and really any of the Misty decks have potential to win. But again, this I think is a proper way to play Palkia. I'm actually just now noticing that we're not playing any new cards in the deck, so I don't know if I really needed to include this this particular Palkia deck here. But no, I think Palkia is still really good. There's a lot of different ways you can play it. Red is certainly a valuable card in Palkia, but I think if we're playing Washout Vaporeon, I think we're more reliant on going back-to-back Dimensional Storm. So if we're playing the whole, Washout Vaporeon strategy, I don't think we need red because we're able to attack multiple times with Palkia. That's sort of the idea here. But if we're not playing, this Vaporeon, combo here, then yeah, maybe we would play things like red, right? So keep that in mind. But here is a version of Palkia that is doing well recently, even though it's, I guess, not too different than it was in the previous formats. But yeah, here it is. And then now we're going to go into Gyarados. We've covered Gyarados before, and Gyarados is a good Pokemon in a variety of different ways. Yes, I've been saying it for a while. Gyarados is, I think, better now than it maybe ever has been. I don't know. That's kind of a stretch. I think when it came out in Mythical Island, it was very good. But this is probably the highest placing Gyarados list so far. In day one of the Ursa Days tournament, this was 8-0. It was the #1 seed. And this is very aggressive Gyarados. So we're playing Rocky Helmet, we're playing Red, and of course we're playing the Manaphy Origin Form Palkia combo here. 2 Misty, 2 Dawn, 1 Sabrina, and 2 Professor's Research, 1 Pokemon Communications as well. So we're going all in on like consistency as well as aggression, a lot of extra damage modifiers here. Now you can play Gyarados in a couple of different ways. I think that instead of being more aggressive and running like Red and Rocky Helmet, you could play things like Giant Cape to be a little bit more defensive. You could attach Giant Cape to Manaphy to get it out of range of those early KOs to like, say like a Carnivine or a Skarmory. But you can also attach Giant Cape to Magikarp to get it out of range of getting KO'd by a Hitmonlee, but that's not a surefire strategy because you have to find Gyarados on the next turn or else it doesn't really matter, right, if you did attach the Giant Cape. So I think that you can kind of play Gyarados either really aggressive, like I said, with Rocky Helmet or Red, or you can play Giant Capes a little bit more defensive towards the Hitmonlee decks. But no, I think Gyarados with Red is probably one of the strongest, if not the strongest Pokemon in the entire game. I've covered this list before. Like I said, I have Gyarados in my top 3 right now in the format. Basically 180 HP, 160 damage when paired with Red is just enough to basically KO anything in the game. And then we have Rocky Helmet to attach to Gyarados if, of course, we don't draw into the Red. So very aggressive. If this Gyarados does get set up, there's really not much that most people can do. It's a really tough Pokemon to deal with once it gets set up. But again, the main downside to Gyarados has always been Magikarp. And then, of course, needing 4 energies. You don't always hit Misty. That Manaphy doesn't always survive. So you gotta kind of keep those things in mind. But no, I do think Gyarados is probably, if not the strongest deck in the game right now, at least at the very, very top of the metagame. So I think if I was going to be playing, one of these old classic Water-type archetypes, I think Gyarados would definitely be it for me. And now let's move on to, I think, the real content of this video, the stuff that I am really most interested to talk about. And that's going to be Mewtwo. So there's 2 different Mewtwo decks here that I pulled up. Let's actually take a look at this one first. So this is going to be Mewtwo and Giratina. I actually went live on YouTube. I don't normally live stream on YouTube, but I went live last night doing ranked battles, and a lot of people tuned in, which I really do appreciate. So shout out to you guys. But we went like 13-2 or 12-2, playing basically this list. The list we played was a little bit different. I took this list from the highest placing deck list in the Ursa Days tournament. And I think that it's all very, very similar. The cool thing about this deck is that we have so much room for all of these ancillary trainer cards that we can be very flexible in how we're building this deck. So the list here that did the best in day 1 of the Ursa Days tournament this weekend, which again we'll cover tomorrow in our meta report, in our weekly, inaugural meta report. The lists that did the best in the tournament actually were playing, Giant Capes, Potions, and Pokemon Center Lady, which I actually do think is correct given how many people were playing Darkrai and Giratina. So I think that extra healing to counteract the extra damage that Darkrai does early in the game is actually really, really valuable. And then again, all of these other cards are really relevant in various different scenarios. Rocky Helmet to fix some of the math here. 2 copies of Red, I think that's correct. Red is our main win condition. 1 copy of Dawn, that can also be a win condition. And then of course we have Cyrus, Giovanni for, again, Rampardos or Meowscarada. And then we, of course, have Sabrina, Red card, Pokeball, all of that good stuff. So The list that we were playing on the live stream was a little bit different. I was cutting out both potions. I was playing Mars instead of red card. I was playing an additional Dawn, and then I think I was playing blue because I think blue is actually really good in this deck as well. And then one copy of Leaf because Leaf can also be really impactful and win you games as well to help retreat out of the active spot for free, conserving those energies. So like I said, a lot of flexibility in how we're playing Mewtwo Giratina. But that being said, I think that Mewtwo and Giratina is actually potentially a top 3 deck right now early on in this format. I think it actually has, I know some people were curious, it actually has a favorable matchup against Darkrai and Giratina, especially when we're playing potions in Pokemon Center Lady. The main reason for that is that Mewtwo can KO basically anything with red, and then also basically we have 170 HP, so even with weakness, they don't really have anything. Even Giratina doesn't have the ability to KO us when we have Giant Cape on Mewtwo, or if we're playing blue, things like that. So I think that this list actually has as good of a matchup against Giratina and Darkrai as any other deck does in the format. It also just does extremely well. And then the main talking point realistically here is Mewtwo, and I think that Mewtwo is back. That's not like a figure of speech. Mewtwo is back. I think that it will end up being one of the top 3, top 4 decks of this format. Basically, you know, Red has completely changed the format in the sense that a Pokemon like Mewtwo was just really awkwardly outside of a lot of those breakpoints, right? It did 160 damage, but it had 150 or 170 HP with Giant Cape. So now with Red, we're able to hit to 170, and that's enough to basically KO everything in the game. And I think that's extremely, extremely relevant. That covers things like Giratina, like Dialga, like Arceus. Just super, super good. Other Mewtwo's as well, Palkia. So 170 is a really, really good number. Mewtwo now is basically 170, 170, and that is a massive difference because, again, all of the breakpoints kind of changed. All of those sweet spot damage numbers have changed because of Red, and I think that Mewtwo capitalizes on that really, really well. A couple of upsides to playing Mewtwo Giratina as opposed to Darkrai and Giratina is that this deck is playing entirely Psychic Energies, which means, technically speaking, if we are going second, we can actually attack with Giratina on our third turn, right? We can go attach Broken Space Bellow, and then attach Broken Space Bellow, and then on the third turn, we've got 4 energies on Giratina. So that is potentially 150 damage on turn 3. Very, very relevant for sure. And then again, basically what this deck wants to do is set up Giratina and Mewtwo at the same time, at least in matchups where Mewtwo is relevant. We have Dawn as well to kind of get those 4th energies on Mewtwo really relevantly. But also, if we do already just have 4 energies on Mewtwo, what we can do is side drive, and then next turn, Dawn up an energy from Giratina, attach to Mewtwo, and then side drive twice in a row. So really, really relevant. The only iffy part about this deck is that, of course, we can't play Dawn and Red in the same turn, right? So we can attack at least once for 170 for Mewtwo, but it's hard to do it twice, which is why one copy of Rocky Helmet, I think, is definitely correct in the deck to help us potentially, you know, force a tie or just force a win, basically, off that additional damage. So definitely really relevant. I have this deck super high up on my my eventual tier list when we do it Tuesday, but it's also performing well in ranked battles and also in tournament play right now. And then the other Mewtwo deck is actually just going to be this one here that I thought was really relevant. So this is comboing with, Mew EX, Arceus, and Giratina. So I think that this is a little bit more of like the traditional like Mewtwo and Mew EX archetype. Instead now of playing things like Gardevoir, now we can just play Giratina and Dawn and then kind of, do the same eventual late game strategies. But again, I think that Giratina and Mewtwo go together extremely well. And then we also have Arceus, which can attack for 3 energy. So in matchups where we don't need that full 150 damage, we can technically attack for 130 in one turn earlier, right? With, Giratina, Arceus, and Dawn. So pretty valuable as well. And then Mew EX, again, does help us to take KOs on some pretty relevant matchups in the game as well. And yeah, so I think it's just another flavor of Mewtwo Giratina. There's a lot of different ways that, you can play Mewtwo, but I think for the most part, as long as you're playing it with Giratina, that's going to be extremely, extremely relevant. Let me zoom out so you can get the full list here. Yeah, and that's going to be the video, guys. So, listen, I think that things like Charizard are pretty good. I think Exeggutor is still pretty good. I think all of the water decks are really good, and I think that fighting is still really good, but you got to play it with Hitmonlee. That's, my big takeaway from the fighting decks. And then other than that, Mewtwo is back, and it's extremely good. And again, if you wanted to play Mewtwo, and if you wanted to upgrade those old Mewtwo decks or play something that, again, is a little bit more new age version of Mewtwo, this is the way to do it. You can still play it with Gardevoir. I don't think that Gardevoir is bad, but I do think Giratina is much, much better. The main reason for that is that we're able to set up Giratina and Mewtwo at the same time, basically have 2 really strong attackers ready to go by turn 3, turn 4. That's very, very relevant here. Tons of space as well to play all these other really great supporter cards that we have in the format right now. This list is playing Mars, Team Rocket Grunt, all things that I think are really, really relevant here. No Leaf, but 1 X-Speed, definitely interesting, but, you know, we do have Mewtwo EX, so that could possibly be a leadoff option. All really just interesting stuff here. We'll have to see. So one thing I'm going to say here before we wrap up this video is that tomorrow is Monday, and we do our meta reports on Monday. So the Ursa Days tournament will wrap up tonight, and then tomorrow we're going to be diving into all of the data and the statistics. So this is the first really large online tournament of this new format. Things have changed a lot, and I am really interested to see exactly what has happened or what will happen in a large tournament like this. So stay tuned, because tomorrow on our first meta report of this new format, it's going to be super interesting, and I'm honestly really, really excited. And then on Tuesday, we will be coming with a new meta tier list. So stay tuned for all of that, guys. But yeah, this is probably going to wrap up my sort of, I made the last 3 videos I made have been about like, what I thought like the best decks were, and then, you know, how to play, you know, all of the new cards, what the best decks are for the new cards, and then this video here is about all of the old decks now updated. So we're kind of wrapping up our initial, you know, deck list videos, and then from now on we get into the format and we do some more topical stuff. So yeah, there it is. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe. Again, I really appreciate all of the support. And yeah, join the Discord. Link the link in the description down below. Definitely hop in the Discord. It's a great place to come hang out. Yeah, let's get out of here, guys. Peace out. Have a good one. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you guys later. Bye.